For 6 years in a row, the experts named it the most innovative company in America. By the year 2000, it reported revenues of around $100 billion and was the 7th largest company in the United States. Its stock was in almost every respectable pension fund in the country, and almost none of the profit was real. The earnings were booked from deals that would not pay out for a decade, if they ever paid out at all. The debt was hidden in companies its own chief financial officer secretly controlled. When it finally admitted the truth in the autumn of 2001, around $74 billion of value vanished, 20,000 people lost their jobs and their retire. Meant savings, and the accounting firm that had signed off on all of it was destroyed. The most innovative company in America, the innovation was the accounting. Welcome to Billion-Dollar Autopsy. This is Case File 9, Enron, the profit that was never there. Enron began as something ordinary, a natural gas pipeline company formed in Houston in 1985 out of the merger of two older firms. It should have stayed ordinary. But its chief executive, Kenneth Lay, and the consultant he brought in to run the business, Jeffrey Skilling, had a bigger idea. They did not just want to move gas through pipes. They wanted to trade it. Like a bank trades money, to turn energy itself into a financial market that Enron would sit in the middle of. And for a while, it worked, or at least it looked like it worked. Enron became a trading powerhouse. It moved into electricity, into water, into broadband internet capacity, into weather. Wall Street loved it. The magazine Fortune named Enron the most innovative company in America 6 years running, from 1996 through 2001. The stock climbed and climbed. Executives spoke the language of the future while everyone else looked slow and old-fashioned. Nobody wanted to be the person who admitted they did not understand how Enron actually made its money. That it would turn out was the whole point. Here is how the money was made, or rather, how it was reported. Most companies record a sale when the cash actually comes in. Enron used something different, called mark-to-market accounting. Picture a shop that signs a 20-year deal to supply energy. Under mark-to-market, Enron did not wait 20 years to count the profit. It estimated how much that whole deal might be worth over its entire life, and booked that imagined future profit immediately as earnings today. If a power plant it was building might one day generate $1 billion, Enron could record the billion now before a single customer had paid, before the plant even existed. The estimate was Enron's own, and once you have recorded that profit, you can never record it again. So to keep earnings growing every quarter, the way Wall Street demanded, Enron had to keep signing bigger and bigger deals, booking bigger and bigger guesses about the future. It was a treadmill. The reported profit was real on paper and imaginary in the bank. And the faster it ran, the more it needed a place to hide what the treadmill left behind, the debt, and the deals that were quietly going wrong. That place was a set of companies that existed mostly on paper. Enron's chief financial officer, Andrew Fastow, built a web of what accountants call special-purpose entities, separate partnerships with names like LJM, and a set of vehicles named the Raptors. On the surface, they were independent. In reality, Fastow ran them and in some cases personally profited from them. Enron would sell its failing investments and its debt to these entities, and because they were technically separate, the losses disappeared from Enron's own balance sheet. Think of a household that hides its unpaid bills in the garage of a neighbor it secretly owns. From the street, the house looks debt-free. That is what Enron looked like to investors. Clean, profitable, growing. But the garage was filling up. The Raptors were propped up, in part, by Enron's own stock. So the entire structure carried a hidden, fatal assumption that Enron shares would keep going up forever. The moment the stock fell, the hiding places would collapse, and everything in the garage would come flooding back into the open. For years, nobody outside made them open the door. A few people did try the door. In March 2001, a Fortune journalist named Bethany McLean published an article with a simple, dangerous question as its title, "Is Enron overpriced?" She had done something almost no one on Wall Street had bothered to do. She had actually read the financial filings and found that she could not work out, in plain terms, how the company made its money. Enron's response was telling. Skilling called her unethical on the phone. Executives flew to New York to pressure the magazine. Inside the company, a vice president named Sharon Watkins saw the danger from the other side. In August 2001, she wrote to Kenneth Lay warning that Enron could, in her words, implode in a wave of accounting scandals. She named the Raptors. She was almost to the letter correct. But at that moment, Enron was still the most admired company in the country. Its executives were still selling the future, and warnings like hers were treated as the problem, not fraud. The treadmill was still running. It had about 3 months left. The end did not arrive as a single explosion. It arrived as a correction. On the 16th of October 2001, Enron announced a third-quarter loss of about $618 million and quietly reduced its own reported value by more than $1 billion tied to those off-balance sheet partnerships. To an outsider, it sounded technical. To anyone who understood the structure, it was the door swinging open. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an inquiry. Then Enron did the thing that fraud cannot survive. It restated its earnings, admitting it had overstated profits going back to 1997 by hundreds of millions of dollars. Every quarter of the miracle was now in question. And as the stock fell, the hidden assumption underneath the Raptors detonated exactly as it always would. The vehicles held up by Enron shares could no longer hold anything. A rival energy company, Dynegy, briefly agreed to buy Enron to save it, then read the books and walked away. That was the signal to the market that there was nothing left to save. On the 2nd of December 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. At the time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in the history of the United States. Over the year, roughly $74 billion in shareholder value had been destroyed, but the number that matters most is smaller and more human. Around 20,000 employees lost their jobs. Many of them also lost their savings because their retirement plans had been loaded with Enron stock, encouraged, celebrated, and in the final stretch effectively frozen so ordinary workers could not sell while executives could. Roughly $2 billion in pensions and retirement savings evaporated. People who had spent their careers at what they were told was the best company in America watched their futures go to zero on a screen in real time, while some at the top had already cashed out. The most innovative company in America had innovated a way to turn its own employees' loyalty into the last thing propping up the share price. Then came the question every collapse asks, where were the people whose entire job was to catch this? Start with the auditor. Enron's books were signed off year after year by Arthur Andersen, one of the 5 largest accounting firms in the world. Andersen was not a distant referee. It earned enormous fees from Enron and had staff practically living inside the company. As the investigation closed in, Andersen employees shredded a large volume of Enron-related documents. In 2002, the firm was convicted of obstruction of justice, and that conviction was effectively a death sentence. Arthur Andersen surrendered its licenses and collapsed. And tens of thousands of its own employees, most of whom had nothing to do with Enron, lost their jobs. There is a bitter final twist. In 2005, the Supreme Court of the United States unanimously reversed that conviction, ruling the jury had been given flawed instructions, but it did not matter. By then, the firm was already gone. One of the great accounting names in the world had been destroyed by the same fraud it had certified. And the men at the top, Kenneth Lay and Jeffrey Skilling, were both put on trial, and in May 2006 both were convicted of fraud and conspiracy. Then the story splits. Kenneth Lay, the founder, died of a heart attack that July before he could be sentenced, and before his appeal could be heard, and because he died before that appeal, a court vaca. It is convictions entirely. In the eyes of the law, Kenneth Lay died an innocent man. Jeffrey Skilling was not so fortunate. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison and a $45 million penalty after being found guilty on 18 counts of fraud and conspiracy and 1 count of inside trading. Years later, his sentence was cut to 14, and he was released around 2019. Andrew Fastow, the architect of the hidden partnerships, cooperated with prosecutors, served about 6 years, and walked out in 2011. Today, he speaks for a fee on the lecture circuit, explaining to business audiences and students exactly how he did it. The man who built the garage now gives tours. Enron did leave one thing that was real. Because the fraud had slipped past the auditors, the board, the analysts, and the ratings agencies, Congress concluded the entire system of checks had failed at once. In 2002, it passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which forced chief executives to personally certify their financial statements, tightened the independence of auditors, and it needed new oversight of the accounting profession itself. Two pieces of it still bite hardest. Chief executives and chief financial officers now have to personally sign every set of results, certifying that they reviewed the numbers themselves, and a false certification is a federal crime, one that can carry up to 20 years in prison. Every public company must also test its own internal financial controls each year, with an outside auditor checking that test. And the accounting profession lost the right to police itself. A new federal watchdog, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, was created to inspect the auditors directly. Because Arthur Andersen had just proven that self-regulation does not work, almost every public company in America still lives under the rules that Enron's collapse wrote. The company that faked its numbers better than anyone became in the end. The reason the numbers are checked the way they are. And that should be the end of it. A cautionary tale filed away 20 years old, except that in December 2024, Enron came back. Not the company, the name. A group led by a man named Connor Gaydos, one of the creators of the satirical Birds Aren't Real movement, had quietly bought the rights to the Enron trademark, reportedly for $275 back in 2020. Now they switched it on. A slick website appeared. Billboards went up in Houston, the company's old home city. The tagline, "We're back, can we talk?" There was a glossy promotional video, and in January 2025, a straight-faced product announcement with Paris Hilton for something called the Enron Egg, a supposed home nuclear reactor. A disclaimer on the site called all of it First Amendment-protected parody and performance art. It was a joke. The most toxic brand in American business revived as content, but a brand built on manufacturing fake value could not simply be worn as a costume. Because the next thing the new Enron did was the part that was not funny at all. In February 2025, the revived Enron brand launched a cryptocurrency, a token called Enron on the Solana blockchain. And it behaved precisely the way its name should have warned everyone it would. According to on-chain reporting, the token was immediately sniped, bought in bulk in the first instant by insiders and bots, then dumped as ordinary buyers rushed in. It pumped, and it crashed within hours. One trader reportedly walked away with around $843,000. Analysts noted that roughly 92% of the token's entire supply sat in a small cluster of connected wallets. In other words, a handful of people held almost everything, extracted real money from the crowd, and left them holding a token named after the most famous fraud in American history. It is almost too perfect. Enron, the original, sold a story of value that did not exist and pushed the losses onto the people who trusted it. Enron, the meme, could not even be revived as a joke without doing the exact same thing on the exact same day it opened for business. The brand, it turns out, is honest. It only knows how to do one thing. So here is the autopsy. Enron did not die because it did nothing. It ran real pipelines and real trading desks. It died because it discovered that if the story is good enough, and the people checking the story are paid by the storyteller, you can report a future that has not happened as though it already has, and keep doing it right up until reality asks to see the cash. Every institution built to catch that, the auditor, the board, the analysts, the ratings agencies, looked directly at Enron and called it the best in the country. The fraud was not hidden in the shadows. It was published, audited, and celebrated. That is the uncomfortable lesson, and it is why the name still means what it means 24 years later. A company can be admired by everyone and be an illusion at the same time. And when the whole brand is the illusion, you cannot even bring it back as a punchline without the illusion coming back with it. 20,000 people paid for that lesson with their savings. The accountants who signed it paid with their firm. And 2 decades on, a token traded on the internet proved the lesson had not been learned at all. Every fortune leaves evidence. Enron's evidence was there the whole time, printed in its own reports in a currency called the future. If you enjoyed this autopsy, like the video, subscribe for the next case file and share it with someone who would find it interesting. This has been Billion Dollar Autopsy, Case File 9, Every Fortune Leaves Evidence.